Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CARC data facing track call for May. If you're not familiar with CARC, that is the Campus Research Computing Consortium. It's an organization for research computing and data professionals to improve their effectiveness, help with career development, and just be a general community for practitioners. Park has a few different parts to it. There's the people network that the data facing track is part of. It's like a virtual year-round conference. That's why we use the track language. But we have 5 different tracks currently, and then a couple partner organizations around different facings of research computing and data jobs, like systems facing for the people who are more supporting the actual infrastructure, data facing here, which is more the things to do with the data itself, like data management and data science. But there's also some more project-like activities going on in CARC. There's some working groups that are working on some actual deliverables of various things, such as the professionalization group is working on trying to jumpstart a longitudinal study of the workforce. There's interest groups. Those are a little less formal. They're more to talk about things and what kinds of deliverables you might be able to do. And then if you're really dedicated, there's our operations group, which just keeps everything running. So there's lots of ways to get involved with CARC. And if you look at the announcements section of the doc, there's a whole bunch of different ways to contact various parts of CARC and get involved. Oh, and hello. You get to see my coworker Sally today.
Ooh,
Yes, hello. Did you just wake up? Cool. And one very important announcement for today, we actually need some coordinators to replace Amy and I because of our various changing commitments. So if you are interested in volunteering, please let us know. If you'd like to nominate some people for us to requisition, let us know. But yeah, Amy and I need to step down, and we could use some folks to come into that role. So yeah, if you or anyone you know might be interested, please do contact us. Cool.
okay. I can take it from there. Thanks, Deb, for that intro to CARC. So as Amy noted, CARC is taking May to focus on accessibility issues in honor of Global Accessibility Awareness Month. So we thought we would invite 2 folks to come and talk about their work with Disability Scholar on their 2023 publication, Actually Accessible Data, an update and a call to action, which was published in the Journal of Library and Scholarly Communication. So to introduce those folks, thank you so much for giving us your time this afternoon. We're joined by Abigail Goben. Abigail MLS is a professor and data management librarian at the University of Illinois, Chicago, where she additionally serves as the data policy advisor for the Office of the Vice Chancellor of Research. Her current research projects include strategic planning in academic data services, systemic barriers for mid-career academic professionals, hype cycles in academic library technological adoption. I'm gonna have a long conversation with you about that. And critical evaluation of data education texts. Abigail teaches coursework in data management, clinical informatics, and information and data literacy. We're also joined by Sebastian Karcher, the director of the Qualitative Data Repository, director of the Center for Qualitative and Multi-Method Inquiry, and research associate professor of political science at Syracuse University. His main research interests are in research transparency, management and curation of qualitative data, and the interaction of technology and scholarship. And he's an active contributor to several scholarly open source projects, including Zotero and the citation style language, and has taught widely on digital technology and data management. When we were talking with Abigail and Sebastian, they wanted to highlight that they are not experts on disability studies. However, they are experts on research data. So hopefully we'll be able to get some interesting insights on where those things intersect today. So we had a couple of questions that we prepared in advance, but I'm really hoping this can kind of turn into more of a conversation. So I'd encourage everybody in the audience to just pop in with your questions and put them in the chat. Feel free to raise your hands. And we'll try to address y'all's concerns. So to start off with a little bit of a kind of intro question, just warm up, wondering if y'all could talk about what in particular drew you to this work and brought you to collaborate with your third author, Dr. Colón.
So thank you for the invitation. Sebastian and I are always happy to talk about this, even though we are not the experts in this. We're very grateful for the colleagues who are leading this and who are true disability scholars. So honestly, this is Sebastian's fault. A few years ago, he emailed the iAssist listserv and he's like, who's working on accessibility? Right? And I saw the email and I responded and I was like, I don't think anybody is, but like, yeah, let me know. Let me know what you hear. Let me know. I don't think anyone's working on this specifically that I've seen. Let me know what you hear. And it turned out that I was the only response. And so we started talking about kind of, some of the things we were seeing in the field, some of the things we were seeing in the discipline. And in my data management course, I had just recently had a doctoral student. So Randy Colón, who is a PhD candidate here at UIC, is in the Disability and Human Development Department. And Randy had just taken Lib 573 with me, which is my intro to data management course. It's an entirely asynchronous course, so we had not had the opportunity to meet in person, but we wanted to work on, when Sebastian and I were talking about this, we wanted to make sure that we had someone with that kind of expertise. So I reached out to Randy and said, hey, would you be interested in, working with us on something related to this? And so he was able to join and jump on the project. This is not related to his research. He's working on housing primarily, but if you think about housing and accessible housing and all of the data that is underlying all of that, he was immediately able to draw from examples of public data where there were accessibility issues, research data where there was accessibility issues. So we were able to kind of draw some overlap between the two of us, or between our expertise. And so that led to taking a look and really doing this call for action where we are not the ones able to do all of the work, but we wanted to really bring our community to be engaged and start working on this particular kinds of things. Sebastian, did I miss anything?
No. I mean, you didn't miss anything, but I wanted to add maybe that from us, there was also like, the reason I asked the question in the first place was we were kind of thinking about, QDR was maturing, we were getting our various certification, Core Trust Seal, those sorts of things. We were thinking about what do we need to look out for. The university just got Syracuse University just had received, I always get my titles complained. I think it's a Title 11 complaint about non-compliance with ADA. And so the university was kind of in high alert on this topic. And so we were wondering, well, what do we need to, what should we do about this? And so I was wondering, what do other people do about this? It turned out there wasn't exactly no one working on it. We found some other people, but there weren't very many at the time that we started.
Yeah, I think your point, Abigail, about how this, even though it wasn't Dr. Colón's specific area of study, but that it spreads into so many different other topics, disciplines, approaches is a really important one. And we'll talk about that a little more later. I got a question about that. So we thought it would be helpful also to kind of set the table a little bit and we talk about FAIR all of the time in the data space, right? And one of those letters stands for accessible. But I wonder if you could talk about how your research team sort of distinguished actually accessible data from the accessibility that's represented by the A in FAIR.
You get 2 minutes, Abigail. Otherwise, this is going to be the
So
rest of the hour.
Yes, we're laughing because this is a frequent and regular conversation between the two of us. The problem is accessible in our current parlance has 4 or 5 definitions, depending on how you talk about it. I don't like FAIR, just universal statement. I believe it's just become a buzzword and it's meaningless. So setting that aside, when we looked at the definition within FAIR, it does not actually get at researchers who have different needs, different accessibility needs, whether that is a screen reader, whether that is tab only, whether that is moving from taking visualizations and making sure you've got alt text. None of that is really explicitly covered. What accessibility in FAIR refers to is basically, can a computer get to it? And so that wasn't the question we were asking. We were asking, can people who need accessibility tools participate with research data in the same way? So it was a different question that we were asking than just trying to slather on FAIR like peanut butter.
I want to I like FAIR a little better than Abigail does, but I actually want to problematize a bit more what they did, because FAIR claims that the accessible does stand for human and computer accessible, right? And like the computer accessible, well defined, but the very implicit assumption behind the human accessible is that they disregard humans that have support needs or have accommodation needs on the computer. They're just entirely left out, and FAIR
Yes.
is oblivious to that. And I think there's things about FAIR. If you talk about accessibility in the sense of open access, I think it's fair to say, okay, we weren't concerned about that. I think accessibility, well, but we're gonna bracket out, depending on how you count, somewhere between 25% and 5% of all human users. I think that was just, bias and ableism showing in the FAIR definition.
Yeah, we have so many of these terms that are just so overloaded, and that tends to absolutely be one of them. Wonder if you can talk about, and you were sort of touching on some of this, but why accessibility is so important in the research data space. I mean, I think we all kind of, just expand on that.
So one actually interesting thing is that a lot of data is reasonably well accessible. That was a point that Randy always made, that because good data is often pretty structured, and I'll talk about my type of data later on, but a lot of data is quite structured. It works well with the type of accommodations a lot of disabled users use. Terminology, some people prefer, people first terminology, people with disability. Randy, who was the disability scholar we worked with, prefers identity first language. And so I use disabled people throughout. That's, there's no right or wrong there, but just so people aren't wondering. So this is, in a way, this is an area in which disabled people could be very empowered, but then you quickly hit the unnecessary roadblocks, right? you can't get to the tabular data in the first place because the data repository doesn't meet even minimal web accessibility standards. The table is disastrously organized because you have some garbage lines in Excel at the top of the table that are really hard to deal with for the screen reader. The tabular data works fine. You load it in our studio has become more accessible, so you're doing reasonably well with that. And then you open the code book, which happens to be a PDF with no structure, and you can't find anything in it. So in a way, we are in a place where there could be a lot of low-hanging fruit, but there's very little awareness, and so a place that could empower people with various accommodation needs doesn't often, not because it would be prohibitively hard, but because people aren't paying attention.
And some of this goes back to kind of like the tidy data movement, right? Kara Wu's work, that kind of thing. If you are making it, I just went and looked at one of the numbers Randy had given us. Over 1 in 4 adults in the United States have a disability of some form. So that's where we're getting that 25% potentially. So it's a weird, it's a weird exclusion of people who are perfectly able to contribute to those kind of things. But if we're talking about good research data management practices, this also, for really minimal extra work, often not only makes it more accessible just to people with disabilities, but it improves that universal accessibility. It improves the universal experience, the same way that not having your slides in bright yellow with orange text makes it a little easier for everyone to read.
Yeah, I really appreciated that you all hit on that sort of universal design aspect of this, right? That you're not just benefiting disabled folks or folks with disabilities, but that everyone benefits from this. And in fact, keeping your data in plain text files is good for preservation purposes, right? I wonder if you all encountered in the course of your research and writing, other examples of where there's this kind of second order effect, positive effect on accessibility?
Well, it certainly happens at a lower level, right? So one of the criticisms that or concerns we receive from reviewers, and something that you may stumble upon when you read our piece, is that it's very heavily focused on accommodations for people with visual impairments. Yeah. And one reason for that is that we were working with Randy, and so that's what we were understanding. But it turns out, if you're thinking of people with blind folks or people with other visual impairments, you actually cover a very broad space, right? You make your website accessible for screen readers. That helps people who are blind. It also helps people with dyslexia. It helps people with ADHD who find that having text read to them works better than jumping around on the page. If you have pages that are keyboard accessible, which blind users need, it helps people with all sorts of mobility issues or chronic issues. So there's a lot of overlap, and if you cover a lot of space by thinking about blind users, that actually covers a very broad disability spectrum. And then there are some areas where you need to be additionally aware, right? Like things like
we ran into a variety of things. Like some of the suggestions we made. We were talking about web accessibility, particularly with our repositories, right? We were looking at that, some of those kinds of things. Different kinds of data. So it could be something like you've got alt text, but is alt text sufficient for understanding a visual? Or like sometimes the reviewers thought we didn't go far enough, which absolutely, there is a lot more work that we could do. And we could not begin to address all of the variety of humans and the support that they could use and should have access to.
But then, of course, and going back to the kind of more universal benefits, findability definitely benefits from adding more machine readable metadata. And there you've got the more positive connection to the traditional FAIR, right? Because actually accessible data, it turns out in many ways, is more capital FAIR because it's more findable and often more reusable.
SEO works better.
That's great. Thank y'all. Yeah, so going back to the text, one of your observations that jumped out at me was, new digital technologies are often lauded for their innovative features, but frequently accessibility has not been considered. It made me kind of think about, the proliferation of all of these AI tools and agents and the way that, their interfaces and their outputs, right, of things like ChatGPT may or may not be accessible. So I was curious if you had any experience using any of these tools, and if you have, what have you found about whether or not they present accessibility challenges?
I'm trying to find, there is a, Sebastian, do you know what Damien's last name is on Black Researcher on Blue Sky?
I mean, you alluded to it, it's kind of oddly for such new technology poor in terms of accessibility, and some pretty basic stuff doesn't work well, and it's kind of disheartening. But it's not a topic I have worked on, so I haven't looked at it in more detail. But this is kind of the type of thing, right? If you have like an old website and you have to retrofit it and all that type of stuff, I have a certain amount of understanding that it's hard for you to make things accessible. You build a new website in 2023, right? It's like willful disregard. You're kind of essentially saying you really don't care. And it's disappointing, right? It's also, and you have some political questions later on, but it's also obviously a sign of regulatory blindness and disregard, right? That highly visible companies that want to contract with universities and governments and et cetera don't automatically pay more attention to this is a sign that the regulatory environment isn't doing what it's supposed to do.
I just dropped a book chapter link into the chat. So Damien Patrick Williams speaks regularly on this, and I will always defer to him as doing the work and being the expert in this area. I think we're seeing, I know I've run into several times, well, AI is useful for people with disabilities. There's an assertion, there's a very positive assertion. Thank you, Janine. There's this very heavy positive assertion that, of course, and how dare you not adopt this tool? You must not like disabled people. That messaging has absolutely started proliferating. And that's not what we're hearing from the disability community and from disability scholars. So it is always going to be easier to build at the beginning and think about it at the beginning. It is the race to, there's often not financial incentive to do that. And so that's why we see things back fixed if they get fixed. So there's, but I would point to Damien's work on this. He speaks about this regularly. He talks about that. I would point to his work and his expertise on this more than my own.
Yeah, I really appreciate, I know we're being recorded, but I really appreciate you saying that about the regulatory framework, Sebastian. I think that there just has not really ever been an effort to develop a regulatory framework to sort of guide folks in this direction, and
well,
to the extent that there
is, right? This is supposed to be baked into U.S. legislation. My sense is the Europeans are catching up because the European Union is actually enforcing their regulations. And 10 years back, Europe was 20 years behind on digital accessibility because they had bad laws and they had zero awareness because they had much less developed disability rights movement than the US. Yeah. And now we're getting lapped because the EU finally got its act together. But now that they've gotten their act together, things are actually being enforced. And like, you can't be a government agency and have an inaccessible web presence, for example. That just doesn't happen anymore. And that's the regulation that is or isn't working.
Yeah, and I think that enforcement piece, yeah, is the thing that's missing. So yeah. So from another AI angle, because this is, you know, forefront of everyone's attention right now. You know, a couple of times throughout the piece, you all note that using automation for things like accessibility checking of documents and websites should always be augmented by like human in loop, right? But we kind of wondered if you see a role for AI tools in enhancing accessibility of our data sets. So things like, could you think about using image classifiers to provide alt text for large image corpuses, right? Just to reduce the amount of human labor that goes into providing that description, which can be considerable.
My sense is that this is very controversial, and including among disability studies. So one position is, look, we have millions of unclassified images. Image classifiers are getting decently good. So instead of locking out people who rely on, say, screen readers entirely, we now have tools to get them about 80% there. And the other position is, wait, are we 80% citizens? That 80% there is somehow good enough. And I genuinely think that is a very hard debate to have, right? Like, are you being pragmatic and genuinely helping people out, or are you using technologism to not do the civil rights work, basically, to provide full accessibility, and stopping at the cheap technological solution? And I don't have an answer. I kind of like to keep it in that tension, and we need to struggle with that, right? The best of both worlds is kind of a human in the loop option. Even if you're going to do this manually, we are at a point where automated classifiers are often so good that generating them and then manually touching them up is significant labor saving. So that certainly I would use, but at scale, that still may be difficult to do. And so, for example, should a social media site, as AI becomes cheaper, automatically attach alt text to alt text less images? I don't know.
And I'll just build on that a little bit. Of course, my first thought is Sophia Nobel, right? Algorithms of oppression. If this is just another layer of that, we already know that some of these tools and some of these image classifiers are built on the same kind of historical bias that we've also already seen. So we're just like, I'm not sure what Dr. Nobel's working on right at the moment, but I'm assuming it's this. I haven't seen her work as late. I would also want to consider, like, image classifiers are cool, right? The ones that where we see it's like the ones that have been that they've put into place where it's like they capture fire on the cameras in California, where it's like it sees that and it says, hey, there's a fire faster than humans can catch it. It catches like 3 to 5 minutes faster. Or some of the animal capture that we've seen in rural, out in the middle of nowhere, in these things where it's like, hey, we saw a tiger go by, or we saw a zebra go by, with something like that. And also those aren't new, right? That's 10 or 15 years old. It's just getting relabeled and revarnished. But I think we also have to look at what, for these tools, the intellectual property theft that has gone into some of them. Where did they get these images that they're training on? Some of the inherent risks to people, right? That goes back to Dr. Nobel. And also, who is having to do the labeling and the screening? We know there is a lot of work that is being done either in South America or in Africa by people who are working in very harmful and poorly paid situations to filter out and Correct. And to try and keep it from just degenerating into the worst. So there's a lot of I will echo Sebastian's words. There's a lot of tension in this area.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up. I feel like those are, at least in conversations that I've been in, it's frustrating because I think we kind of just cede the utility and the presence of these AI tools without really having those critical conversations all of the time necessarily about the things that they're built on,
Yeah.
and considering that labor and the like intellectual property theft that you're talking about. Yeah. So with that in mind and touching back on the regulatory framework, we in the United States have a new administration in place, as I'm sure we're all aware at this point. And it has different priorities than previous administrations. Do you see a way for those of us who work in the data space, both in higher ed and beyond that, to kind of continue to advocate for enhancing the accessibility of our research data?
I mean, you just can't count on the government, but that doesn't mean you don't do it, right? Disability advocates fought for quite some time without any government help, and with significant constraints on often their bodies. And so just saying, oh, the Trump administration doesn't want to do this anymore, so now we can't do it, is kind of a weak cop-out. So you just, now that you know certainly where you can start, where you can go, where the remaining areas where we need to get better in terms of what we can do are, you just keep working on it. And I think there is a debate about rhetoric, right? How loudly do you want to foreground it or not? And I see, again, there's a certain tension. You can say, I'm just going to mainstream accessibility into everything that I do, and I'm not going to talk about it. It's just, when I do data curation, I handle accessibility. And I think that's a politically appealing strategy. It may also just be normatively right, and that it's not like a big thing that I have to talk about. It's just something that I do. But there is the counterpoint that you say, the disability movement has traditionally been very effective because it's loud and noisy and, block stairways with wheelchairs and you name it. And so by essentially silencing accessibility and disability related work, are you doing it a disservice? And again, I don't have an answer. I think it's a question you have to think about and ask yourself, and what am I comfortable with? Why am I comfortable with it? Am I comfortable with it for the right or the wrong reasons? And then you find something that works within your organizational framework and within your personal politics. I'm not comfortable with saying one of those strategies is right, but they're both there. I think what's not an option is to shrug and say, well, you can't do this anymore.
We're all waiting to see what happens with the Title II things. Like it was huge push and everyone was like, all systems go. And I feel like that's gone quiet at the moment. I don't believe it's gone away, but I do believe it has gone quiet with the current administration's openly including accessibility as something that cannot be prioritized on university campuses. But as far as I know, we've still been told, hey, you're still working on this. That is the message from our leadership, is we still continue and this is still important.
And so, Abigail, for folks in the audience who may not be familiar, the Title II requirements are around accessibility of web content. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it's been entertaining because as an instructor, they're like, you will have support and you'll know what you need to do. And I have neither support or any real clue on what I need to change. But it prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. And what we're trying to navigate and figure out right now, like for me, one of the things that I use on a regular basis is Open Refine, right? that was something when Randy was in class with me, we actually had to have a like he and I had to sit down together on a screen, like Zoom call one day and work through whether or not he was able to, but whether or not he would be able to use OpenRefine for the homework assignment. If not, I was immediately prepared. I had an alternate assignment. We actually talked through some other options. He was like, no, I want to use this software. This software sounds great. But we needed to sit down and figure that out together. And I don't have a lot of institutional support to do that kind of appraisement and analysis. So it fell to my student, which is not appropriate, to help me figure out whether this would work. So even something like that. And this is also a conversation that we had with the Data Curation Network. One of the things I believe we cite in the paper is their new accessibility curation primer, which is great and is a wonderful addition, but it separates it out as an accessibility, like it's an accessibility primer. It's not necessarily, and it's something DCN's very aware of and is working on very carefully and strategically. They want to integrate it into all of the primers, not just to have it as a checklist over to the side where it might be ignored. But DCN is the Data Curation Network is absolutely aware of that and is working on that.
Yeah, and for folks who are curious, we've linked to the Data Curation Network's accessibility primer in the call doc notes. So please feel free to check that out at any point. It's a great resource.
Yeah, Rachel Woodbrook from University of Michigan and a couple others, they do a really nice job with that.
Yeah, so I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. I have one more for y'all that's kind of a gimme too. If no one else from the audience wants to jump in. But for folks who haven't yet read the article, maybe if you all could talk about a couple of the practical steps that you recommend for folks who want to make progress on ensuring data resources are accessible, maybe beyond taking a look at the DCN primer.
Yeah, so I do think some pragmatism is helpful. So the first place where you start is making sure that your repository is reasonably accessible, right? And you do that with a mix of automated tools and learning a little bit about how disabled people navigate websites. So certainly get used to testing your website with a keyboard. Ideally, NVIDIA is free, so you can have a good screen reader on your computer, and because most of us aren't trained to it, it's kind of slow and painful and annoying. If you've ever seen a blind person navigate a website with a screen reader, I don't understand a word because they speed the text up to like 500%. It's super impressive. So it's a little more cumbersome for people who aren't using these tools on a daily level. But we pretty quickly get a sense of, okay, this seems like it's really useless what we're doing here, right? And so you can do pretty good testing even if you don't have the resources to pull in people with disabilities. Ideally, you get the resources, but we haven't been able to, right? And especially if you're looking for like a specialized site where you need testers who understand both the substance and have a disability, those people might generally be hard to find. And so develop some basic expertise to what you should be looking for in terms of accessibility. That would be number one, make the website that presents data accessible, because otherwise people are never going to get to the data. And then the second thing, and we have this other article that we co-wrote with Teresa Anderson, one of my graduate students, who we had to all of the work on the actual curation part. That was more about what we tried to do at QDR to put some of this into practice. And so the next thing is you build accessibility into your curation steps. And you just think about, okay, what are key points that we need to hit? What are tools that we're going to use? When are we going to use them? How are we going to make calls about where that makes sense, right? We still, because we got qualitative data, we get a fair amount of like unstructured PDFs. And if you have ever remediated accessibility in PDFs that other people have created, it's impossible laborious. Like, we can't do this for a file deposit with 3,000 files. So in some cases, you know, we say probably not really going to happen here. But in a lot of cases, it's a bunch of Word docs that gets converted, and it's structured text, no tables, no images. It's trivially easy to do the extra 3 things that put a little bit of structure in it, make sure reading flow is okay. You know, the couple of things that then make a PDF or something like that easily readable. So build this into your workflows and have like good guidance and outlines of what needs to be done, how it can be done, what tools do you use, what tools can you not rely on, what type of information from the tools can you trust, what type of information do you actually need to manually verify, those sorts of things. And then, to the extent that you can, and we try to go back and remediate for past deposits. Again, we made a cost benefits analysis. What can we easily do? We just did, and that's something that I think I picked up at Code for Lib. We just put a tag in our accessibility information. If you want to use a collection that you don't find isn't accessible, shoot us an email and we'll try our best to help. But right, like, a lot of data doesn't get that much usage, so at scale, it might not be worth it to spend hundreds of hours to make it accessible, and then no one who actually ever needs it will use it. And so in some cases, doing this on request is perfectly fine. So that would be kind of my key take homes from our work around that article.
And I would just add, so we have Figshare is our institutional repository platform and our small data platform. I'm not the one managing that. Right? I work with researchers getting things into it. I'm, front end, but also oftentimes we are not the people doing that data curation. We are not the people who are going to end up being responsible for this, but integrating that into your conversations, into what you're going to need to do. So if I'm talking about, you're going to have to prepare this data to share it publicly for the NIH, you're going to have to prepare this data because the data underlying this paper has to be made accessible. Right? As of July 1, for everyone who was having fun last week, party of me. But so to something Sebastian said earlier about just kind of normalizing and integrating that you have to think about how someone using a screen reader can access your data. You're going to have to think about this. So let's think about it now. Bringing that earlier into that, the same way that we talk about making your data open as a grant requirement, make your data accessible. That is just going to be part of what you need to do. And familiarizing that and making there are points where making it not a big deal there, and Sebastian's spoken more eloquently about this than I am at the moment. This doesn't always we can normalize saying, hey, you're also this isn't accessible, this isn't going to work, so let's figure out what we need to do. Let's prevent creating more hundreds of thousands of PDFs that no one can navigate. How Adobe is allowed, considering how much we pay Adobe, the fact that this is not just an automatic really should be a very large question for all of us.
I actually have a different view. So one of the things that I wish I had known earlier is how bad PDFs are for accessibility in the first place, right? You can kind of try to do all the things, but they're just bad for accessibility. And the fact that we kind of, as digital archivists, got so attached to PDFs because they have other nice properties. Mainly, they kind of keep looking how they're looking, especially if you use the PDFA standard for archiving. That's a nice property, but they're terrible. They're right. It's really hard to get semantic tagging in there. like if you need to zoom in, it's a whole mess. They're getting a little bit better, but it's still a whole mess. And like, we have perfectly lovely formats for these types of things. Like EPUB exists, HTML exists, right? So it's kind of unfortunate how wedded, and that very much includes QDR, the digital archiving community is to PDF for archiving, because it's a bad format for other reasons too, but primarily for accessibility. And so one of my dreams is to at least have alternate formats as a default alongside PDFs whenever they're generated from semi-structured information, right? So you have Word documents, you automatically create either an HTML or an EPUB or something like that that's better for many disabled users alongside the PDF that maybe people are really attached to because it prints nicely or whatever the reason. Academics, I mean, it's not just us, and academics are even more attached to PDFs than digital archivists. So there's like this a weird thing going on. But so that's my.
I like my pretty printer.
See?
I do remember my our digital archivist at Duke, my previous institution, being a real grump about PDFs, and I just thought, you know, you're I'm sorry, but so yeah, so we've got some folks sharing some resources, but there was a question too in the comment doc about other universities with resources to make repository content accessible. So if folks have, oh yeah, Wendy's gone ahead and asked as well. If folks are willing to share those resources or techniques or strategies in the chat, or come off mute if you'd like to contribute.
Yeah, I'm just curious in both of those aspects. I put in the notes document some information that our library shares around repository content requirements for accessibility. And then, so really interested in how other people share out this information and at what point in the workflow of submission to repositories, thinking specifically about repository content. And then why you're doing that. So at Cornell, we have a web accessibility requirement, and it's unbelievably strict, and it is driven by, from perhaps the same kind of thing that you talked about at Sebastian at Syracuse. There was a lawsuit, and now Cornell is going very much to the extreme without a lot of funding to help support making the content accessible. But nonetheless, we're doing what we can and trying to offer tools and guidance on how to do that. So I'm just always looking for both why other people are doing it, and you kind of touched on that, and then the very practical side, what guidance are people providing. So thank you.
And folks should look at some of the stuff that Wendy and her team are doing at Cornell. We cite them as one of the case studies of, you know, people are doing good stuff in this area in our paper. And one of the cool things, apart from the requirements for documents, which I'm imagining are much cooler from the outside than if you're the person who has to send stuff back to faculty because it doesn't meet those papers, they also have a really thoughtfully designed metadata vocabulary to tag for accessibility, and that I'm frankly quite jealous of. So that's something to check out.
Thank you, Sebastian. It's something we are continuing to work on. So always really interested in what the community as a whole will find useful. Oh, and I had another point in there too. If it comes back to me, I'll turn I seem to be frozen in the video, but I'll put it in chat. I had another thing I wanted to ask everyone. Oh, I remember what it is. Sorry. I'll let it go. Sorry.
No worries. This is the other wonderful thing about Kark, is that we'll circulate this call doc. So if you think of something after the fact, please feel free to add it to the call doc, and we'll go ahead and send that around probably sometime next week along with the recording. So Well, I just want to note we are almost at time. I think we're actually maybe a little past time, but wanted to thank you both again so much for taking the time to chat with us this afternoon. And if there's anything else that you wanted to highlight for us before we kind of bring things to a close, I'm going to give you the opportunity to do that.
I just want to highlight that there's lots of small, high impact things that you can do, and I'm very much of the don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So if you feel like this is all overwhelming, if you at least pick a couple of things and get those right, you know, more accessible data. It's more accessible, even if it's not in all cases as accessible as you would like to be. So you don't have to be perfect, although ideally you will want to be, but don't let that stop you from just being a little bit better, doing a couple of additional things, asking that vendor for the VPAT, running the fact checker, and getting on your IT team for stuff that isn't working the way it should be. All those little things that don't take that much time and that you can do.
I would say also kind of 2 points. One is reach out to your Disability Resource Center or your Disability Cultural Center. You can draw from experts. There are experts likely at your institution. If you're at a large university, there are people to reach out to. They would love to talk to you about this. I'm sure they always have a lot of things going on, but I'm sure they'd love to talk to you about this. And also, there is a lot of interest and appetite for how we made this a little more accessible. If you find something that works, the community is very interested in hearing about it. So we spoke at a number of conferences, and repeatedly people were very, very interested in looking for, you know, help me. Is there a quick guide to writing alt text? Is there something to help me get started? So thinking about something that you want to get started with and that you can do well and that you can share with others so that they can also adopt.
Great. So just get started is the the takeaway, right? All right. Well, I hope everybody will join me in thanking Abigail and Sebastian for joining us. Deb or Amy, I don't know if there's anything you want to say in closing for Kark.
I'll just say thank you so much, Abigail and Sebastian, for getting this conversation started. More work to do.
Always.
Thanks all for having us.
Yeah, great to see
thank
you.
you.
Hope everybody has a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye all. Thanks for coming today.